Hi, my name is Enrique Cardona. My friends call me Henry. I'm making this video because I want to talk about something. I'm a big fan of Spider-Man. If you notice, I have one of his full T-shirts. But every day now with the new Spider-Man Homecoming coming this July, which is gonna be awesome. Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man with Tony Stark, the Captain America, the whole Avengers. I mean, it's awesome to hear that he's going to be with the Avengers and the whole Marvel cast. It was something that we were waiting for a long time. But there was a time, but sometimes actually, there are many times that I was thinking, what if? What if the deal between the MCU and Sony never happened? What if it was just a rumor and only just a rumor? What if the franchise that the Amazing Spider-Man was building to the future was still going? What if the Amazing Spider-Man 2 wasn't the final chapter of Sony's Spider-Man? So I want to give my ideas or my thoughts on what would have happened if the entire MCU never bought Spider-Man back. What if the Amazing Spider-Man was still going? So let's begin. So my thoughts, if when I think what would have happened. So let's pretend that so far everything's still going. That the whole Sony was still going until this day in 2017. The Sinister Six spin-off would have been made if Felicity Jones was actually Black Cat, or Venom was already in the theaters right now. Pretending that maybe Ryan Gosling was the Venom. I mean, say what you want, or maybe that was just a rumor. But to be honest, I really thought that maybe Ryan Gosling was actually going to be Venom in some point, because let's face it, he's bulk, he's so strange, and he's so cocky and arrogant. So it would have been a great Venom character. So what would have happened? Well, in my opinion, if I may say, they would have made the Clone Saga. Now, a lot of people know about the Clone Saga, especially Spider-Man fans. It was one of the most longest comic book storyline that they ever made in Marvel. They were facing problems with financial problems. They were facing creative problems. So Spider-Man had this story about his clone. There was a point in time in the probably in the 70s, if I'm correct, they made a clone of Spider-Man with Miles Warren and Gwen Stacy involved. Gwen Stacy died. Then the clone was made by Miles Warren because he was sexually attracted to Gwen. It's kind of creepy to think about it, but it's true. I mean, there was a point that he actually melt all the clones of the Gwen Stacy without that didn't succumb to his will. But I don't want to get into that because that's disturbing, and that I getting forward. So what is it about? The Clone Saga was Miles Warren creating a clone of Peter Parker, also known as Spider-Man. They both fought. Miles, in his insane mind, thought that was just far enough, and decided to destroy the lab, destroy everything, and that was pretty much the end of that comic book saga. And over the years, Spider-Man continued to save people, having those bad times as a comic book character. In the end, until now that he was married to Mary Jane and his Aunt May in a state of coma, as you can call it, he had enough and he wanted just to be the Spider. No more Peter Parker, just the Spider. So, yeah, that happened, and to his surprise, he finds out that he has a clone, that his clone was still alive, and he was going to the name of Ben Riley. So they both had storylines in which Ben Riley had to fight Judas Traveler, well, just the stupid name. The trials, the death of Aunt May, um, the whole Mary Jane being pregnant, Ben Riley taking the place of being Spider-Man, finding out that he was actually real and Spider-Man was, Peter Parker's Spider-Man was actually the clone, which pissed a lot of people off. And of course, there was the storyline in which the miscarriage of Mary Jane and Peter, the return of Norman Osborn saying that he was planting all along to be the Jackal, with the Jackal and his clones things, Kane, Spider Size. It's a whole story. And I might think that they were going with that in Sony's franchise of Spider-Man. So what would have happened? Well, for starters, Peter Parker would have met Mary Jane in the third movie. They would have fallen in love. They would have decided to be together until the point that he wanted to get married with Mary Jane. But of course, there was a problem that he was still feeling guilty about when and stuff. Probably they would have introduced Venom, maybe, or maybe they would have continued with another story, probably with the Sinister Six, probably fought the Sinister Six in the third, which I thought it would be. Thinking about it, it would have been a lot of a filler, and they had to introduce him. They had to first make the spin-off before going to the third movie, which, in my opinion, that would have made a lot of good things. But of course, continue with the story I was talking about. There might have been the point in time that the guy in the shadows, you know, the with the hat and the coat, was actually Miles Warren. Now he was actually playing the name of another character, but let's pretend for a second that he was the guy that the Wikipedia says he is just a man in the shadows and with a different name, but in a Star Trek Into the Darkness twist, he was actually another person. You know, Benedict Cumberbatch was actually John Harrison, and then he would have said, "I'm actually Khan," or as they like to say, Khan. No, he didn't say Khan. That's how he said it. Let's pretend that the guy in the shadows was actually Miles Warren, that he was actually watching Peter throughout his whole life and he wanted to make a clone out of it. That his father's research was actually the key for clonation. I know, it's crazy, but that would have happened. And there were a lot of rumors that maybe Emma Stone and Dennis Leary will come back and probably make Spider-Gwen. But let's pretend for a second that they were actually were there to be the clones. So where would the clone would have been introduced? I think at the end of the movie, perhaps, or maybe during the movie. In the third, that would have been the same thing. The Sinister Six fighting Spider-Man, Peter falling in love with Mary Jane Watson, perhaps being played by Shailene Woodbine if that would have the idea that Mark Webb was going. And what else? Maybe Venom, or maybe Venom. I mean, it's either Sinister Six or Venom, depending on which one is first, or maybe another story with a different villain. Well, continue with the Clone Saga. It would have been introduced in the in the half of the end of the movie, which the Man in the Shadows just let's pretend the Sinister Six or Venom. No, let's say the Sinister Six. The guys had a movie, and they confronting Spider-Man right now. They both fight him, and at some point they capture him and take his DNA for some reason, and then the Man in the Shadows would have taken that DNA, and they would have used it to create a clone. And in the end of the movie, they said everything is going according to plan, and they made a clone. So that happens, and of course, in the fourth movie, which that was the idea that we're going with, would have introduced that clone. Ben Riley, probably played by Andrew Garfield, and or maybe just Andrew Garfield was cloned. Let's say he was cloned. In the beginning, we see also Gwen also being cloned, and they start and the clones of Gwen and on her father would start chasing or stalking Peter Parker, the real Peter Parker, in the real life. Let's say they were watching him, and he somehow sees Gwen and her father, that he's been stalked, that he feels like his mind is playing games with him. And then probably at the beginning or the middle, he sees himself, the Peter Parker clone, or as we all know it, Ben Reilly. So that would have happened, and then in the movie he starts fighting him, and then he discovers the Jackal, the man in the shadows. He would say, why would he do this? Because of his father's research, because Norman Osborn was dying and they want to bring him back, but they didn't know how. So they convoluted this plan of making clones. And Peter Parker was the perfect prototype to make a clone, or maybe something out of the comic books. And you must be thinking, what about Harry? Well, he would have gone out and be part of the Sinister Six, and he would have had this incredible plan to take his DNA and then give it to Miles Warren to make the clone. Now, let's remember one thing. There were rumors about making Harry Osborn the bad guy in the Clone Saga, but they scrambled those plans and give it to Norman Osborn. So, but if they would have stick with the original plan, with Harry being the actual mastermind behind those Clone Sagas, and they would have made the clone of Peter Parker, that would have been Harry saying, hey, Peter, this is what you receive for being a bad friend and not giving him your blood. Now make your match, or, something out of the comic books. And let's pretend for a second that he fights his clone, and his clone, Ben Reilly, is actually fighting Peter Parker in order to, say who's the real man, and we all would have been confused who would have been the clone. I'll throw out also the fact or the thought that maybe the clone of Ben Reilly would start mutating into a real spider, like in the comics. It would make sense, since it's a clone and the mutation also take its deformity and stuff. And maybe, just maybe, Miles, the guy in the shadows, whoever was playing this guy, Miles Warren, he plays the Jackal. Not with the Speedo and the Green Goblin ripoff. I'm talking about the one that we see in the comics, with the whole Egyptian mask, or helmet as you like to call it, and then making this whole clones of Gwen, of Dennis Leary being Captain Stacy. Use your imagination, guys. If they would have stick with that franchise, you might be thinking that they would have gone in that direction. So what do you think would have happened? Well, he would have beat the clone. He would have beat Harry, and he would have beat Miles Warren, or maybe Miles Warren, because having Harry probably wouldn't be a great idea in the fourth one, and maybe, just maybe, he would have just in the third one, Harry would have just been in prison or died for his mistakes. I don't know, something like that. I don't know if there was going to be plans for a fifth, but at this point, maybe Andrew Garfield didn't want to make a fifth movie, just 4 movies. If they would have been successful, that would have been the plan. And I don't know. I mean, The Clone Saga is the most hated version of Spider-Man because they play with him like a toy. But in some respects, there was good things and bad things in the comic books. The 400 edition gave us a heartbreaking death of Aunt May, and they gave us a couple of interesting stories, and they would have continued with those stories if the franchise was still here. Probably they would have that as spin-off with Felicity Jones playing Black Cat. Maybe give her a story. Probably the Sinister Six would have stick around. Maybe Venom would have been played by Ryan Gosling. Anything. We all know that the franchise of Spider-Man is the most big of all the Marvel stories, and that says a lot because the Avengers always have many stories, but not individually, always as a group. So yeah, I would have think that's my what if the Spider-Man franchise would have gone. What else could have been in the movie if they were sticking around? Probably the marriage between Spider-Man and Mary Jane. Probably we would have seen James Jonah Jameson. Maybe Aunt May was getting sick and maybe dying. Maybe I don't know. Probably would have continued with some other plots. The Spider Slayer. Maybe he would have helped the Miles Warren to make the clones. I don't know. But that's my thoughts, and that's what I would have gone if the Spider-Man franchise would have continued.